Portland, Oregon looks incredible online. You have lush trees, amazing access, walkable neighborhoods, amazing local fairs and food. But what you don't always see online and what you hear from the news is stuff that people move here in the first place and end up regretting it entirely. Now, Portland is very specific and Portland, Oregon makes no exception. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing my top 7 reasons why you should not move here to Portland, Oregon. And honestly, if any of these are a deal breaker for you, then maybe Portland, Oregon isn't the city for you. And definitely, before you start planning and packing up, making this preparation for that move, definitely stay tuned for the entire video, and especially the last reason why some people end up regretting here entirely. And it's not homelessness, it's not the traffic or the taxes, it's about lifestyle. And it's why some people end up regretting it entirely. So the first one I want to talk to you guys about is something that I take to heart. I moved here many years ago from Texas, and it's really the social shock. It's the Portland passive, so to speak. Essentially, you know, generally whenever you go out and meet people, whether it's at the gym or at the mall or at work, generally people are nice. People want to talk to you and try to build that connection. But when it comes to building a deeper connection, typically that's the hardest part. It's easy to make acquaintances and colleagues, yeah, but the hard part is really growing the acquaintance, growing that bond and that friendship or that deeper connection, because usually people here in Portland, Oregon, social circles are typically already, established. And so whenever I first moved here, it was actually pretty tough for me to actually, one, make friends, but really grow a deeper connection. And so what really changed for me was I actually had to go out and venture. I went out, was a part of a lot of clubs such as golfing, running. Obviously the gym is a big proponent of my life. And so that's how I grew up those connections, and then actually made a commitment, made an actual effort to really follow up with these people, go to events, invite them to social gatherings. And so I think if you are an extrovert or someone who thinks this is that fast lifestyle, maybe this isn't entirely for you. Similarly, whenever I moved here, I was a newcomer at that time and I didn't feel that sense of connection initially. And my first year and almost 2 years in, it just felt different. It felt weird. And so if you're moving here and coming out, just have a different mindset. And typically who feels this the most are going to be, for sure, obviously transplants, relocation workers, clients that I typically help with, and of course extroverts, because in reality, Portland, Oregon is really an introverted city. At the end of the day, people do keep in themselves. Yes, we are generally people pretty nice to each other, but at the end of the day, we tend to keep to ourselves and go about our business just because we do enjoy and we do entertain that laid back lifestyle. Now let's talk about housing affordability. This is obviously a big one. I help clients move here every single week, and from Texas, California, Nevada, New York. And so the number one question I typically get is housing costs. Now, housing costs ever since COVID occurred a few years back in 2020, definitely has increased the availability, 1, the inventory, 2, but home prices, 3. And with that, you have to consider where you want to live. Obviously, each area of the city of Portland Metro is going to be different depending on what type of lifestyle and you typically want. Obviously, when it comes to Portland, Oregon, there's going to be certain segments. Portland, Oregon, like inner city, typically higher priced areas because they're very established neighborhoods such as Laurelhurst or even like Northeast Portland area. But then there's going to be new construction development, especially on the east side towards Happy Valley, or even if you're considering the west side, we can consider talking about Beaverton and Hillsborough, because this is where a lot of the employment opportunities such as Nike, Nvidia, and of course the major headquarters of Intel is also here as well. And so there is an expansion of new development opportunities that creates a lot of potential multiple offer situations. I always relate back to the Pareto's principle. About 20% of homes in the entire Portland Metro are typically going to be more sought after and typically going to have multiple offer situations. And so it's important to know, 1, where you want to live, and then 2, what type of income and threshold that you're willing to make, because by no means is Portland, Oregon cheap. Are we the cheapest city on the West Coast? Yes, we are, but at the end of the day, we are a West Coast city, and those West Coast cities demand West Coast prices. And then this leads me into the second reason why you shouldn't move here is the state income tax. Now, I moved here from Texas many years ago. We didn't have a state income tax over here. And so whenever I first moved here, before I got into real estate, I remember physically looking at my check and was like, I worked, the full 40 hours a week. but it also didn't feel like I got paid or reimbursed for it. And of course, yes, come tax time, you might get reimbursed. I definitely believe you should definitely consider that and take that into consideration when you're deciding to move here. And there's definitely other benefits. Yes, we have access to nature. Yes, we have the local food and local businesses. But another big proponent is we have no state sales income tax. And now, does that even out with the high income tax that we have? Possibly, but at the end of the day, you really need to assess your numbers to figure out what makes sense for you and your family, as well as what type of lifestyle that you want to employ. Now, obviously, when it comes to high income taxes, this is going to greatly affect those high income earners. And so people working high into those positions of, the tech sector, you're definitely going to feel it. And so having that additional income tax compared to maybe the southern states like Texas, Florida, Colorado, it doesn't matter, definitely is going to outweigh the benefits and pros and cons of what state you're potentially moving toward, what type of employment opportunities are going to be out there for you. Now, this often surprises a lot of relocation clients. I tend to work with them a lot, especially if coming from Texas. They tend to not realize the ramifications of the high income. So they move here for that benefit, but then they also don't realize that the taxes will eat up, and it's a slow hemorrhage over time. So to kind of end up on this bullet point, the cost saving of having no sales tax whenever you go buy a $5 matcha or a $3,000 MacBook, does that outweigh or benefit more greatly than having a state income tax? Most likely not. And so this tends to catch a lot of people off guard, to a surprise. It certainly did to me whenever I first moved here. And so definitely assess what makes sense for you. And if you guys are thinking this information so far is pretty helpful, definitely drop a comment below to figure out where you're potentially going to be moving from. Let's go into the next one, because this next one's pretty important, which relates to obviously the state income tax and sales tax, but it's the job market here in Portland, Oregon. Now, this job market is pretty competitive. Obviously, back in COVID, the job market was much different. Things are starting to tighten up more. Obviously, we have the Silicon Forest, which I'm referring to the west side. You have your Intel, you have Nvidia, you have a whole bunch of manufacturing, you have a lot of semiconductor companies. Of course, you have the major Nike headquarters, but that's mostly it. That is the Silicon Forest on the west side. You don't have access to Microsoft or Google headquarters, Amazon, even like you do up north in Seattle. And so what that really means is the only employment opportunities are one that I just mentioned. Therefore, it creates a lot of demand for those jobs. It creates a lot of competitiveness. And so people tend to fight over those entry-level jobs, maybe middle-level management jobs, whatever. And so just understand the ramifications of that job market. And of course, there's going to be other employment opportunities and businesses that you can try to create. But at the end of the day, this job market can be pretty competitive. So just keep that in mind when it comes to the limited presence of those major corporations and headquarters like Microsoft and Google. But there's also limited presence of those high-level executive jobs, C-suite executives like a CEO or COO or CTO, it doesn't matter. And then you also have a limited presence of financial jobs like investment bankers, comparing to like New York City. And so with the limited presence, it creates a dichotomy or an arrow towards employment opportunities in the Silicon Forest, like I mentioned, Intel and Nike. Therefore, it creates a lot of demand. Demand creates leads to demand in housing, and that really has appreciated the value, especially in those new construction pockets. And something a little bit of a subset goes back to the housing affordability. Wages and salaries, unfortunately, they haven't really kept up with the rate or the market demands compared to wages being offered here towards housing and cost itself. And so that can be a little bit of a concern. You're making a certain wage, but in reality, can you afford the house that you want? Possibly not. You might have to employ gifts from friends or potentially just save a little bit more money. The job competition is very niche and very competitive. And so understand the ramifications and understand what type of market that you are entering. And so I always recommend clients who are potentially wanting to move here to Portland, Oregon, to really assess, do you have a job lined up? Or do you have savings at least lined up for maybe 6 months up to a year in order you to find that job that you actually want and willing to enjoy here in Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, is not a one-size-fits-all. It's very niche, it's very specific, and by no means does the job make that exception. If you're relocating here and you're just really trying to crunch numbers and assess if it really makes sense for you, definitely reach out to my team and I will help you crunch those numbers to really see if ultimately Portland, Oregon is a viable option for you and your family, to see if it really makes sense or not. Let's head into the next one. This next one, I want to talk to you guys about traffic, okay? Now, by all means, we are a West Coast city, so we're very old. You can't really just live in one area and, commute to another area. There's a whole bunch of gridlots. Obviously, we're split in half by the I-5 corridor as well as the Willamette River. We have about 12 bridges, but these bridges, the infrastructure is just not built for the amount of people that are currently living here. And of course, COVID has really created a true strain on that. We've seen a good influx of people moving from Texas, the southern states, as well as California and Seattle. And the infrastructure is just so old, it's not built. The mapping system here, the grid system is just not built for the amount of people. And so you see multiple gridlocks, especially the I-5 bridge connecting Portland and Vancouver, all the bridges that connects the east side and the west side. And so these gridlocks are typically outside of traditional rush hours. You know, it can start as early as 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and expand to 7 o'clock at night. And of course, early mornings are the same thing. It could be as early as 7 o'clock in the morning, upwards all the way to 10 o'clock in the morning. And so it just really depends on where you're at and where you're living at. And so definitely, if you're trying to work on the west side but live on the east side, I'm gonna absolutely say that's a no-go, and you should really consider assessing where you want to live. Don't be like me. I first lived in the Bethany area whenever I moved here, but then commuted all the way to Wilsonville just to work before I got into real estate. That was a big mistake on my part, especially understanding how busy and how the infrastructure was built for the amount of commuting and the traffic that unfortunately this city can't really withstand. At the end of the day, daily commute adds to daily stress, and I think that's ultimately going to affect what your experience here is and what type of lifestyle you're actually going to have. And so again, it doesn't make sense for you to work in one part of the city and then commute to another part of the city. And now, yes, we have access to public transportation like the TriMet. You can potentially bike or walk to certain areas, but at the end of the day, when it comes to commuting, do you really want to bike and walk in the rain or the cold or the snow? Probably not. I'd say about 99% of the population here, when it comes to commuting to work, they're always going to take some sort of vehicle. All right, this leads me into my next section, which is homelessness. Now, come on now. We are a city at the end of the day. We are on the West Coast. We're going to deal with homelessness no matter what. Are we in LA? No. Are we in New York City? By no means, no, but we are going to deal with it. But it's very specific to neighborhoods. You live in one neighborhood, you might not ever see homelessness, like for example where I live. But whenever I first moved here, I lived in a not so great area. And then I, tend to dealt with more people, more tents, more homelessness, leads to more drugs and more crimes. And so depending on where you live, you're going to definitely see a more sporadic or episodes of homelessness. Something that's even worse, or the bad part of when it comes to this type of situation, is the pressure of the political landscape when they're trying to address these systems are pretty inconsistent. For example, you drive closer to Portland, Oregon, you're going to see an encampment of homeless people in tents in one area, but then another month goes by, you see them in another area because of policies being enforced and whatever. And so one, enforcement varies dramatically, and as the political landscape is shifting back and forth, you're going to see tents popping up in certain areas and then being moved and then being brought back. It's going to be so important to choose a neighborhood that is, one, safe and clean, and not choose a neighborhood that might not be the best fit for you and your young family. Experience differs from block to block. So at the end of the day, this can surprise a lot of newcomers. And again, I don't want to try to scare you or understand that, this is a war zone or there's encampments everywhere. We're not in LA. We're gonna deal with a problem just because we are considered a major city in the entire US. But understand what homelessness really is. This is not a political chat or a talk. This is just the reality of what Portland Metro and the day-to-day activities of homelessness is. And then before we get into the last reason, this one's pretty big. And it's not about the homelessness that I mentioned. It's not about the traffic or the taxes. It's truly about lifestyle. And lifestyle is such a huge factor. You guys actually don't realize it. Because are we a big city like Seattle or New York City? That fast-paced lifestyle that typically you hear from. Are we a San Francisco nightlife bustling lifestyle? We do things a little bit different here. We're very unique that we have more of a laid back approach, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. Now, yes, there's going to be misconceptions about certain things, and yes, we're going to have entertainment such as local dining, nightlife, and local events, but think of it at a much smaller scale or a much smaller event compared to those bigger cities that I mentioned. Here, we just prioritize things a little bit differently. Balance over hustle, local over flashy, and then comfort over ambition. Now, by no means there's going to be definitely ambitious, flashy people out there, but the good majority of the people here living in Portland, Oregon just do things and think differently compared to the San Francisco, Seattle, and the New York cities, the Miami of the world. And so I think this is why it's the real deciding factor when you're considering, and probably one of the most reasons in my opinion, whenever you first move here. Don't expect that flashy lifestyle, because we do things here differently, and that's what makes Portland, Oregon unique. And that's why we have the great saying of keep Portland weird. All right, so that's all the reasons, my top 7 reasons why, most people end up not liking here and move away entirely here in Portland, Oregon. By no means does that make Portland, Oregon a bad city, for sure. I lived here for many, many years ago, and I relocated here many, many years ago. And so I haven't looked back, and I don't plan on moving anytime soon. It just means Portland, Oregon has a very specific lifestyle, and it needs to fit a certain individual or certain person. And so if you're enjoying this video, this channel is all about living in Portland and moving to Portland, Oregon. Tune in, because I drop videos every single week. If you're thinking about moving or relocating here to Portland, Oregon, and you need a little bit of help or guidance to really understand if Portland, Oregon is a little bit fit for you before you actually regret it entirely, my team and I, we help clients move here to Portland, Oregon every single week. And so reach out to my team. Our information is below and in the description. Call me, text me, email me. Definitely reach out so we can help you and provide a little bit more guidance to see if Portland, Oregon is the right fit for you.